everyone. My name is Brianna Berkowitz. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator at American Public Gardens Association, and I'm so glad you could join us today for our IDEA Café on Indigenous partnerships with gardens and parks. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to kick things off.
Thank you, Brianna. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Neal. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a subcommittee member of the APJ IDEA Café and a marketing specialist at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. And I'm excited to introduce today's IDEA Café. Our topic, Indigenous Partnerships with Gardens and Parks, is a three-part series, and the next cafe will involve Indigenous Partnership collaborators. So we hope you can join us for that. Today on the call, we have Malin Plummer, Director for the IDEA Center for Public Gardens, a program of the Denver Botanic Gardens and the American Public Gardens Association. Also on the call for chat support and questions is Brianna Berkowitz, Professional Development Coordinator for the Public Gardens Association, and Trey Ramsey for part of the IDEA Cafe APJ Committee. And if you have joined us before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome, and we are so glad you're here. Our goal is to build a community of conversations and create transformation one conversation at a time. We hope today's topic will be launching point for further discussion within your organizations. We will moderate further questions after each panelist, as Brianna explained, and open up the conversation to participants at the end. Before we get started, I have a quote from Jeanette Armstrong, author of Owaga Nation. Let us begin with courage without silencing those whose ideas and voices may differ from our own. As we talk and hear from our four panels today, let's also keep in mind that terminology and cultures within Indigenous communities of North America all vary, as you can see from some of the maps that we have in our resources page. And we'll be having a resource page and an email with terminology and links. So I'm excited to introduce our first panelists today to share their experiences. We have Dan Stern, Director of Horticulture, North Carolina Botanical Garden, Gerald Dieleman, Senior Director of Horticulture, Assiniboine Conservancy, Chantal Martin, and Naomi Lane from the VanDusen Botanic, and Wendy DePaolis, Art Curator and Sculpture, Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. So welcome, everybody, and we're going to kick it off with Dan.
Thanks, Rachel. Let me see if I can't get this presentation up for you folks. Rachel, could you confirm that the whole slide is showing there?
You need to expand it a little bit further, Dan. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to join this panel and I'm excited to share the partnership that we have with the UNC, that's the University of North Carolina American Indian Center here in Chapel Hill. I also want to spend a minute giving you sort of a little bit of context, a journey of how we got here. So I'm going to start with some of our early efforts to celebrate Native American knowledge and use of Southeastern native plants. We worked with members of the Cherokee Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation back in the mid-'80s to develop a Native American herb garden as part of our core horticultural collections, depicted here on the right, and also worked with the Museum of the Cherokee Indian on a short video shown here on the left, Plants and the Cherokee. Again, this is the mid-'80s and some 40 years ago. I think well-intended, but in retrospect, may have been a little too task-oriented, product-oriented, and not as much attention, paid to maintaining relationships with those partners over time. And in hindsight, I think it feels a little extractive. So we've learned, and through this journey, trying to, change our priorities moving forward. We want to fast forward to 2019, when our garden, like a lot of other gardens, we're really taking a long, hard look at the mirror about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We formed a committee to address these issues that had a couple of, principal goals, including making sure that we, were diversifying and being more inclusive in our board composition, our staff composition, developing a land acknowledgement, recognizing that we're far from the first, but really the most recent and current stewards of this land that we, that is under the umbrella of the North Carolina Botanical Garden. So this is a step, but again, as I think a lot of people will agree a land acknowledgement is, really the beginning of a process. And, with the sort of the help and the insight of some members of our board, in particular, this is the Botanical Garden Foundation board. One of our board members, who is a member of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, really, challenged us to think critically about our relationship with Native Americans in North Carolina, and, challenged us to think it's not a question of how do we start relationships. We have them. How do we make them better? How do we make them reflect our aspirations for real meaningful partnership and connection? So, we are stewarding lands that will and continue to be, used and enjoyed and cared for by the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation. But looking more broadly across the state of North Carolina, we can see that there are 7, state and federally recognized tribes throughout different parts of the state. And how can we connect, more comprehensively and more effectively, with the broader Native American community in North Carolina? And fortunately, what we recognize is that we've got a great ally right here on campus at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. So this is the UNC's American Indian Center, which traces its roots back to the early 2000s, when it was sort of recognized that here we are, the flagship campus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the largest concentration of Native students east of the Mississippi, and there was there wasn't a sort of focal point to coordinate activities and elevate the prominence of Native American culture and learning and wisdom here on our campus. It's just coincidentally or serendipitously, the American Indian Center and the North Carolina Botanical Garden are administered under the same branch of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We're both in the Office of Academic and Community Engagement. We're both charged with realizing the university's public service goals. So we make for very natural allies and partners. So we bring together these two organizations, that have very complementary capacities, highlighting here some of the strengths that the American Indian Center, brings to this partnership: community relationships within an existing network, a lot of existing programming, being able to help us better understand Indigenous perspectives and the cultural knowledge and wisdom. North Carolina Botanical Garden is bringing to this partnership some of our own strengths, including some facility space and meeting space that has been and continues to be used to create some space for Native voices and Native speakers to speak in our community, some tangible resources that we've been able to bring to bear in this partnership, professional knowledge and project management experience, which I'll be sharing in a little bit more detail. So with these two entities sort of, overlap here, with envisioning ways that we can mutually design programs and work together to sort of leverage our respective strengths to really do something greater together. And I just want to highlight some of the things that we, very happy to have been able to do over the last few years with the American Indian Center. We've had a series of lectures featuring Native American speakers, from short lunchbox talks and workshops to annual major lectures. And last year we did a full day symposium, Green Roots, Red Resilience, that featured 4 speakers from 4 different tribal nations and over 85 attendees. That was a really fantastic, sort of expression of our partnership with the American Indian Center. And then most recently, and maybe most directly, I've been just really delighted to be able to work with the American Indian Center in bringing to the fore this idea of an American Indian cultural garden. Here, I've kind of highlighted, I guess, some of the other collaborative work that we're doing with the help of the American Indian Center. This is more engagement with the Native American community out in the community itself. So we've been able to do some peer exchange, knowledge exchange, a healing garden as part of the Waccamaw-Siouan tribal lands. We've been able to participate and help support Waccamaw-Siouan STEM Day, where they featured Venus flytraps, one of our most iconic North Carolina plants, and engage, Native American youth in growing these plants and ideally, planting them out in tribal lands and nearby state parks. Just very recently, we went down to help be a part of a traditional prescribed burn on Lumbee land pictured there. So not just working directly with the American Indian Center here on campus, but working through them to sort of engage more directly with Native Americans across the state of North Carolina. I kind of jumped ahead here to talk about the American Indian Cultural Garden. This is another project right here on main campus that we've been able to partner with the AIC, the American Indian Center, on. This was envisioned, by the American Indian Center as a gathering space to celebrate American Indian cultures and indigenous ecological knowledge, to support American Indian students in adjusting to life on campus and serve as a teaching tool for the greater community. And this is really where some of our project management experience and landscape design and installation experiences been able to be some added value to the American Indian Center to help realize this goal. We went through sort of a visioning process funded by the Triangle Community Foundation, where we worked with the American Indian Center and North Carolina State's Landscape Architecture program to do a feasibility study for this American Indian Cultural Garden. Some of the pictures shown here illustrate the stakeholder engagement that was key to that being a success, and then worked with a local landscape architect to develop this master plan for the American Indian Cultural Garden. Since then, we have taken the boots to the ground and started preparing this space. You can see in the upper left here some images where we've been removing invasive exotic species, that had invaded this site, and trying to clear the way for something, really rich and vibrant. This has been done in, a partnership with North Carolina Botanical Garden staff, from the Horticulture Department and Conservation Department to the American Indian Center and the Native American community that's here on campus. So we've broken ground in the first phases of implementation, where we're building pathways into this space, starting to develop additional seating areas and ceremonial gathering spaces, additional plantings to come. And I think what's really exciting about this American Indian Cultural Garden is that we're just about to onboard the first group of undergraduate and graduate students. These are a cohort of students that are come on board this spring and take part in a Conservation Gardening 101 series that the Botanical Garden offers, learn applied gardening from my team, and then put that into practice with some community planting workshops in the American Indian Cultural Garden and taking on the maintenance of this space. And it's a train-the-trainer model, so that moving forward, this first cohort of ambassadors with the American Indian Center will train the next class of stewards and ambassadors of this space. So we're sort of building in some sustainability to this program to make the management and care of this American Indian Cultural Garden very doable, and maybe in the process of doing so, inspire some Native American students here at UNC to explore careers in horticulture, conservation, or landscape architecture. So this has really, come to be a very vibrant partnership with the American Indian Center, and looking forward to continuing to move this forward and explore new opportunities to work together with them. I'm going to stop there. I think I'm on borrowed time. Gerald, thank you. I'm going to stop share too.
All right.
Stop there and stop share.
Thanks, Dan. I will start sharing. And Rachel, can you confirm where?
I see your full screen. Go ahead.
Perfect.
Thank
All
you.
right. My name is Gerald Dieleman. I'm the Senior Director of Horticulture at the Assiniboine Park Conservancy. I'm on Treaty 1 land in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. I'm going to talk today about the design process we went through here with our Indigenous Peoples Garden and how it relates to some other aspects of what we're doing here at Assiniboine Park. So the project location on Turtle Island, which is the First Nation way of describing North America, is really in the heart of the North America. So the green star you see in the middle of the first image there, that indicates where we're located. And the text there on that map just shows a lot of different names of different, First Nations and tribes throughout North America. And I think you'll see a variety of different maps that show similar names and distribution. And so that's just a point there, is that there's many, many different nations within North America that identify as First Nations. The second image there just shows natural ecoregions of North America. And the point here really is just to show that there's different ways of describing North America than our geopolitical boundaries and state and provincial and international lines. Within Canada in particular, certain parts of Canada there were different treaties created between the First Nations people and the government of Canada over different years. And so that's why when I describe Treaty 1 land, where we live happens to be where the first treaty was written for a certain parcel of land. And you can see the green star there that shows that. And so within Manitoba, there are 5 different treaty areas within the province ourselves. Just a little bit of context, Turtle Island, if you hear the phrase Turtle Island, that means we're referring to North America. And there was a lot of conversations when we started our project of colonialization in Canada. There was a lot of conversations about inclusion and diversity goals, the Truth and Reconciliation Path in Manitoba, and IDEA, which is all ideas whose time had come. And so this was sort of brewing in the local community just in general. But here at the park, we were on the verge of a large infrastructure project. And so the image you see on the screen is that large project, a large conservatory that you see on the top of the screen, and various gardens and outdoor space. And so when we were on the front end of this project, just as this project was getting underway, Canada was starting to focus on its relationship with Indigenous peoples. So we're talking around 2008, 2015 in that time frame, and more specifically on the process of recording hard truths about the treatment of Indigenous people in Canada over the past 150 years. This came to the forefront of the national conversation. So the nationwide work on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada started in Winnipeg in 2008. And in 2015, the Commission released a series of reports documenting their consultations and findings. And in addition to the reports, the Commission prepared 94 calls to action as an accessible and easy to use tool for all Canadians to follow, or could follow as a real world steps that could activate meaningful evolution of this broken relationship between the First Nations and the colonist Canadians. And so today, the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation continues to do their hard work and important work at the University of Manitoba, which is also here in Winnipeg. So the point of speaking to that is there was a lot of conversation at the time when we were on the front end of developing what our infrastructure project was going to be. And so we needed to think about that and include that in our decisions of what we were going to do on the landscape. In some of those initial meetings, our CEO at the time had a conversation with different, sort of focus groups, and there was a woman, Indigenous woman, in one of the focus groups, and she was asked, what do you think of the park, or tell us about the park, and the response was very simple in that she didn't feel welcome or safe in the park. That was our starting point. And so from there, and we knew, okay, we needed to incorporate something into our plan that would address that and those issues. So we had we have architects, we have designers, we have that whole group, and we went to our landscape design team and we talked about this, and we said we need something that speaks to the Indigenous people of Winnipeg, of Manitoba. We have a very large urban First Nation population here in the city. And the team came back to us and they said, we love this project, we want to be part of this project, but we can't be your designers. You need Indigenous designers. You need the Indigenous voice to be the design team for this project. And we said, that's great, but how do we do that? And how do we get to that point? And through their network and their own interactions on other projects, they brought us in contact with 3 designers who came to be part of the overall design team. And so what that resulted in, and the reality is in 2016 and even now, the world of design had very few Indigenous design architects and almost no Indigenous landscape architects. So we had to put our trust in and build a relationship with these 3 designers who have come from various different design backgrounds, architectural and natural landscapes, and built a relationship with them. And so that's Dave and Mamie and Cheyenne, and they came along and helped us sort of with this process. They were and are the conduit or the translators of age-old traditions into contemporary design, reflective of Indigenous people in this time and place. And APC, which is the organization I work for, really was helped to bring that to reality by financially investing in the team and believing in the team and believing in the time it takes to get this project going. And so that was the beginning of the relationship on that end. It is an iterative design process. There's ceremony, setting good intentions. There's a process of gathering, visioning, and a journey of connecting and discovering. And so there's a lot of conversations to get to a point where voices are heard and represented. And design is not a straight line. The process is iterative. It's a journey, not a destination. And even more so when designing for 7 generations, which is a phrase that Dave always used with the team, that he's designing for 7 generations, the next 7 generations, and with truth and reconciliation in mind. And so this was sort of our starting point, and really in thinking about how we were moving forward. It started with a sunrise ceremony. Dave and Mamie and Cheyenne, our 3 designers, they said we need to start with a ceremony. A number of different people are invited: elders, knowledge keepers, youth, and really to get things started, to build trust, to build a path, to contemplate, to give thanks, all of these things together. And as a group, we walked through the site that we were thinking about to get a sense of the place, and really working together to get feedback was powerful. And we used it the team used it as a reminder of the project, coming back and coming back to it over and over again to make sure that the team was staying true to what was achieved in those visioning sessions. There were two of these or multiple of these over a period of time to generate ideas and then to flesh out those ideas from the preliminary meetings. Basically, everyone contributed and was able to participate. We needed Dave and Mamie and Cheyenne, our design team, to build the trust. Because if people were to share information or to share their feelings or their thoughts, there needed to be trust, and a design team had to build that first. If the park had invited everyone to come and just say, let's talk about what could be, first of all, I'm not sure very many people would come. And second of all, I'm not sure people would share as openly as Dave and the design team could do. The other thing too was they talked about a lot. What came out of this was a lot of Indigenous knowledge that was willing to be shared, traditions, practices, and really roles and responsibilities just sort of within the community, and lots of conversations were happening, and how that got to being represented in the landscape was the task that Dave and Cheyenne and Mamie had to pull together. The talk ventured a little bit into programming and activities of the space, and how it would be, what would occur in those spaces, and what was required, and what would the space be best suited to. So really, we're talking about ceremonies, and quite often the conversations led to ceremonies that are intricately tied to male and female, and so that those thoughts came up quite a bit throughout the conversations. So during the design phase, Cheyenne, Mamie, and Dave would go to sites. They would do a smudge. They would center themselves. They would talk, eat, laugh, and sketch, and they would draw and build on each other's ideas. Quite often, they would meet with elders. They would brainstorm. They would meet independently, and just to keep the design going in that sense. One of the 3 designers would drive out to see an elder or a knowledge keeper to get a deeper discussion about symbolism and meaning of ideas. In Manitoba, there are almost at least 60 different nations within our Manitoba. So what results is there's many ways that stories can be told and interpreted. And it was important to capture the universal truths, but not necessarily specific stories. And so that was also on their minds of how to keep that in mind, of how within the First Nation population, it's a very diverse population. And how does that get represented in a garden or in a landscape? And so slowly, detailed graphics would come together, just sort of trying to build on those conversations. And so with that, the team developed a plan, and resulting in shaping the land, reviving and healing a native landscape, teaching the next generation how to build, infusing the landscape with meaning, and representing many languages and new forms. And so this was part of a larger infrastructure project. And so we had a large construction design firm that was doing a lot of work in other parts of the space. And we wanted a community build. And so we invited a local youth group from that works with Indigenous youth, urban Indigenous youth, brought them out to site, and they were working alongside the carpenters, and they were working alongside the horticulture team who were planting. So we had a planting day and a carpentry day on the same day, and it was a design build day, and engaging youth to be part of the building of this process. So, we had the design team that was really trying to capture voices and ideas into their design, and then we wanted to bring in youth to help build the space, to be part of the space. And so those were a great 2 days, difficult to pull off when you have a number of different people who are essentially volunteers, and you have to make sure they're fitted out in safety gear with the safety boots and insurance and all of that. But everyone was working together to make this happen, and that's really what brought this together. And just the idea of being on site, participating in the physical building. A lot of the participants there, they'd never planted a plant before. They'd never held a drill before. And so these were all new experiences. And the goal here was actually to provide some work experience, some real life experience, and to see what resonated. The key, along with building some of the physical infrastructure, the design team really came up with two key areas: a water node and a fire node. And this is what came out of those conversations with the different communities and different individuals. The water node is also referred to as the women's node. There are 13 spheres, art pieces here, each with a carved symbol on each of them. None of these describe a specific story, but they do reference the change of season. And so are indicators, or they're meant to be sort of things to highlight. If an elder were to come or a ceremony were to occur here, there's cues to draw from that particular elder or that particular knowledge keeper can speak to and choose to talk about, as opposed to someone sharing a story that they just didn't necessarily want to share, or being specific to one particular nation as opposed to another. So really the conversation was about the connection to the land and the change of the season. And so again, right after installation, this is roughly what that part of the area looked like. The second piece is the fire node. And so, and again, the same idea here. There's an art installation on the wall. You can see that in the background of the photo here. Again, speaks to the change of season. This is a different space where ceremonies can occur. Not quite as intimate as the water node. There's room for a larger gathering here. And this is really sort of a hub and a gathering place for larger gatherings. And so you can see sort of an aerial shot of that space. It's a connector to the leaf and to the gardens, and sort of works as sort of that conduit between the physical outdoor and indoor aspects of the larger project. In addition, it's just a unique space that's meant to be welcoming and safe within the context of the park. The other aspect too is there are many languages that are spoken. There are 7 key languages, and so we try to incorporate those into what we were in the different elements of the spaces that you would walk through and carry yourself through. And so a way to welcome people just in the 7 main languages that are spoken amongst the First Nations people in Manitoba. Other elements here, it's hard to see under the snow cover here, but there's our lodges, and you can see 2 of them in the foreground. This is as you leave in the parking lot and you're heading towards the leaf, you get these modern contemporary interpretations of a sweat lodge. And so there's 3 of them actually in here. They're not used as sweat lodges, but they are actually art pieces that speak to that. The notion here is a reminder as you approach this new facility, this newness, that you're reminded that there was somebody on the land before. There was somebody here before. And that's the reminder that you get as you approach the leaf itself. And that's the conservatory. The garden spaces are surrounding this space. When we did the visioning sessions, one of the key things that came out of that was just the false idea that we needed to create a particular area called an Indigenous People's Garden, when in reality, the Indigenous space is everywhere. And so the request was the reminder really was to include notions of Indigenous culture throughout the gardens of the leaf and throughout the leaf itself. And so we have a kitchen garden, and there's elements in the kitchen garden here as you approach the leaf. There's elements here, and yes, we do have the Indigenous People's Garden, but it doesn't end at the border of the Indigenous People's Garden. It does go to the rest of the space. And so that was also an important thing that came out of the consultations and visioning sessions with the community. And so growing from here, our team's role really was the horticulture team role was a building project, getting the gardens constructed. But the design team was very clear with us. They said, we love being part of this. We love the creativity aspect of building and creating, but how are you going to use this? What are you going to do next? And that was a key thing that also had to be incorporated into what we were talking about. it's great that we had ceremonial spaces, but what ceremonies were going to happen there? How was this going to happen? What programming would happen? And so what came out of this was the development of what we called our Indigenous Programming Advisory Circle. And so this is a number of elders who and knowledge keepers and some youth as well. There's about 6 people on this circle. And they really are a sounding board, a group that our programming team really goes to, I think, quarterly, if not more, to review the programming that's going on in the park, what types of activities are happening in the park, and then sort of a back and forth conversation about that. Some good feedback comes in terms of the aspect of programming, and a reminder of really what are we including in when we talk about these spaces. And that's really here. So we do have days in the park, sort of I guess anytime there's a festival or an event or some sort of activity going on, we do make sure that one of the elders is there, usually one from the IPAC circle, just meeting and greeting people and talking about the significance of different elements of Indigenous culture or things that are of significance to them. And so those opportunities happen in interactions quite a bit throughout the space. One other thing that was really interesting that happened was a lot of trust building happened. A lot of trust with the elders and the design team, that the design team was truly representing the community, and then also the community with the park, and that the park was truly stewards of the land. What happened, interesting enough, and then the image shows a totem pole, which is not of Manitoba. This is a West Coast, something you would find on the West Coast, not in Manitoba. However, the local Southern Chiefs organization, which is a quasi-political organization here in Manitoba, of the Southern Chiefs, they were donated, or they were gifted a totem pole, and this particular totem pole tells the residential school experience. And so it is a very significant piece. They were gifted it, but they didn't have a place to host it. And so they asked the park, could you host this in the Indigenous People's Garden? And so this was and we did, and it's there, and it will stay until they're ready to relocate it to where they have their final exhibition spot for it. But in the meantime, it's a sign of trust in the park that we can be stewards of this. Other things that have happened that have established out of this is relationships with the design team and finding opportunities with other projects. And so within the leaf itself, within the conservatory, we have different exhibits and different displays. And so, our next display is a Fleur de Ville themed display, which is really, it's like the Rose Bowl. It's these dried flowers on mannequins, and basically the mannequins represent apparel. And so the design team, we asked them to come back and ask them to participate in this program, and they will be showing or their interpretation of the Sky Woman, and she will be one of these pieces in this exhibit. And so it's making sure that when there's always an opportunity, and understanding that there's always an opportunity in a moment where Indigenous voices can be included and heard. And it was so easy to say, well, that should go in the Indigenous People's Garden, or that's this or that. But the reality is, no, you can apply this to any aspect of what you're doing. And this is just another example. But again, trust was built earlier on in previous works. So this is sort of a building of that. And so the Indigenous People's Garden has been open to the public for a few years now. We're still exploring the full programming potential, and that's the exciting part. With our IPAC circle, really that really is key, and we're looking forward to developing the space further in a meaningful way. And again, just making sure that it is that welcoming, safe space that was lacking before. And that really is a quick synopsis of where we are and who we are. And this is one piece of that overall program and project. But this is, thank you for letting me share this. And I know the design team, if they could be here, they would speak more eloquently to the whole process. But I'll leave it at that, and then I'll turn it over to our next.
Oh, thank you, Gerald. We have a lot of questions, and we'll save them to the end. There's a lot here, so thank you so much for your presentation. And next we have Chantal Martin and Naomi. If you want to load your slides.
Gerald just has to stop sharing.
I will do that. Right, there we go.
Full screen, if you can, Naomi or Chantal.
Hmm, I'm going to try again.
Okay.
Is that working?
Yep, here we go. You're
Sorry
all
about
set.
that.
No
All
worries.
right. Perfect. Okay, so thank you all for taking the time to be here. There's so many people today. I'm so excited. So I did want to start by just, I may or start with a good morning, or I guess it's afternoon now over here. But my name's Chantal Martin. I'm a woman with curly red hair, brown eyes, and freckles. Right now I'm wearing a teal shirt. And I wanted to start this presentation in a good way by telling you a bit about where I'm presenting from today. So it's actually quite bright here. We're expecting snow, and we're on the beautiful traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And unceded, just for those who don't know, means that there was never a treaty signed. And so when I say that these lands are beautiful, I really mean it. We have mountains surrounding us, oceans, lakes, rivers, salmon-bearing streams, forests with these beautiful, majestic trees towering over us. And stewardship of these lands and reciprocal relations have always been and continue to be of the utmost importance to the peoples of these lands since time immemorial. And you can see on the map that I'm sharing, just in that small red circle is what we call the Lower Mainland, which includes the city of Vancouver. But there's actually just within what we call the Georgia Strait here, this small region, there's 19 different nations tightly knit in this small area known as Coast Salish peoples, but all with different culture, different protocol, and also different language groups are in there as well. And so, the stewardship of the lands and the reciprocal relations are written in cultural protocol. It's shared through oral history and storytelling, and worldview is shaped by respect for all relatives for these First Nations. And the land and waters here continue to provide for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to this day. And so I'm really excited to share today how the Vancouver Botanical Gardens Association facilitates Indigenous inclusion, because I think it's vital, but also because it's one way that I can offer my gifts through this presentation and encourage Indigenous inclusion in reciprocity for the lands and the peoples of these lands that continue to support me. And so I mentioned I wanted to start the morning in a good way, which included a land acknowledgement. You might not even notice that I was doing an acknowledgement because it wasn't a script that you might find, for example, in an email signature. And the VBGA really encourages our employees and volunteers to deliver personal and meaningful oral land acknowledgements when we have the chance. And another way to start in a good way is through gratitude. So I wanted to share in the Halkomelem language, which both the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh nations speak. I say Haitshka, or thank you all. And in the Squamish language, which is spoken by the Squamish nation, I say Hoitcha, which also means thank you. And so learning the language of the land is one way we can show gratitude, and learning how the peoples of the land refer to themselves and practicing the proper pronunciation is also a great place to start. So I'm just going to turn it over to Naomi.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. As Chantal mentioned, my name is Naomi Lang. I use she, her pronouns. And I am a woman with long, dark brown hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a navy blue sweater today. Before I dive into the Vancouver Botanical Gardens Association, sometimes referred to as VBGA, I thought I'd just share a few brief details about my background and how I arrived in this role. So currently I'm specializing in Indigenous education at the University of British Columbia, but I've also studied other disciplines like animal science and agriculture. And I first began working for VBGA through this past summer through my university's Indigenous Work Learn program, which partners with local organizations to support the career development of Indigenous students. So today I'm fortunate to work alongside Chantal as the Indigenous Education Facilitator at the Vancouver Botanical Gardens Association, which is a charitable nonprofit jointly operated by the Vancouver Botanical Gardens Association and the City of Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation. The VBGA's mission boils down to connecting people to plants. The VBGA is responsible for education, volunteer programs, membership services, and philanthropy at VanDusen Botanical Gardens and the Blodell Conservatory. As you can see in the photos there, the VanDusen Botanical Gardens houses a vast outdoor collections amongst 55 acres in the heart of Vancouver, and Blodell Conservatory, which is located nearby, is a lush indoor tropical dome. And since Chantal and I work within the education team, we are focusing on Indigenous inclusion within education programs at Botanical Gardens.
Perfect. So now I thought I'd just talk a little bit about our journey as the VBGA. When I came on board around 2017, we had a traditional medicine wheel, and Indigenous folks have led ceremony there every solstice and equinox for over 20 years. We also have traditional medicine garden and plant labels which feature plants in the Hul'qumi'num language. And then around 2017, we introduced a new role focused on sharing and teaching our summer campers about Indigenous heritage and culture and how it relates to plants. And so we received federal funding from the heritage sector, and the job title was Canadian Heritage Educator. And so if you didn't catch that, we made a huge mistake. So the name obviously wasn't appropriate given that Indigenous culture was formed long before Canada. And so we also gained an understanding that Indigenous initiatives and inclusion require more attention at the gardens. And we hired a full-time Indigenous initiatives coordinator, and we still continue to hire Indigenous students through partnerships with other organizations, especially those that prioritize career training opportunities for Indigenous youth. I do want to say here, it's important to note that while these roles are a good starting place, the work towards Indigenous inclusion is everyone's job. Talking a little bit about framework, we also started a Truth and Reconciliation Committee at the VBGA. As Gerald was talking about, in Canada, a commission released 96 calls to action for truth and reconciliation between Canada and the Indigenous peoples. And so we've taken this seriously and we integrate this in our work. And we're also guided by the framework of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, commonly referred to as UNDRIP. And so we also continue to build relationships with host nations, but also Indigenous-led organizations that serve the diverse urban Indigenous populations. So, for example, we host family days with local nations, and we do tours for youth in partnership with an urban Indigenous youth group in our area. Professional development is really important to us. So we host staff professional development sessions, which are focused on truth and reconciliation, but we also encourage staff to learn more by taking courses externally. Also, all of our volunteers, including our board members, take a mandatory online module, which is focused on respect and understanding of Indigenous peoples and culture. For education programs, we offer many education programs for the public, that include Indigenous perspectives. So, for example, tours, field trips, professional development for teachers, and adult education. And often these programs are developed and led by Indigenous facilitators, but also many are purposely developed with a very thoughtful approach so that they can be led by other folks on the team who are non-Indigenous as well, ensuring that we're following protocol. And we also promote resources created by Indigenous peoples. So, for example, we lend book bundles to teachers through book series called Strong Nations. And so we have these out of our on-site library. And these books are written and illustrated by Indigenous peoples, and they highlight storytelling from various nations. And this allows, for example, teachers back in their classrooms to share traditional stories by reading directly from the book and referencing the nation, author, and illustrator. All right, over to Naomi.
Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies. So as the VBGA moves forward and continues to implement these Indigenous initiatives, especially as a non-Indigenous led organization, it's important to reflect on what we've learned throughout the process and what we can improve on as we learn from our mistakes. So when approaching this topic, we want to consider, who is this benefiting? Although we are speaking within the context of a botanical garden, it's crucial that we remember and prioritize the well-being of Indigenous peoples if we are going to make meaningful change. So even though we have these projects that we really want to implement and be on a timeline. It's just important to keep the Indigenous people's intentions in mind and interests. Additionally, another lesson we learned while implementing these initiatives was that not everyone will agree. So not everyone will be on board at first. Sometimes it takes a few people to start the ball rolling before the rest follow. And then, which leads me to my next point. So with this next point, I really want to emphasize and stress the importance in understanding that Indigenous people have the inherent right to say no. And so I bring up this point because historically, Indigenous peoples have been removed from decision-making processes and have had little to no autonomy in what happens to them in their communities. So as a way to support Indigenous self-determination, we have to respect and honor their decisions. This also is related to the points that related to one another, but it's another lesson we learned was that relationships take time. So as the other panelists were mentioning, like any other relationship, you have to build a foundation of trust and mutual respect, which again takes time, and again over the course of multiple interactions, and building that mutual understanding with one another is very vital. And then next is that it is better to try and fail than to do nothing at all. So even if you do make a mistake, as Chantal mentioned, it's better that we try and continue approaching things that might be new and unfamiliar and sometimes can be intimidating. But again, mistakes are how we learn. And so we can't let that kind of restrict us from doing nothing. And so in learning from our mistakes, it's also important to have humility and to be receptive to feedback. So remember that your mistake doesn't have to overwhelm you with guilt or shame, but instead it can be just taken as a learning experience in the future. Again, it's very evident when somebody's putting in effort to do better, and it's evident when somebody's not. So just keep that in mind. Moving on, we also learned that two things can be true at once. So Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall came up with the term two-eyed seeing, which refers to the concept of intertwining the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing and the strengths of Western ways of knowing. So when you think of two-eyed seeing, you can think of one eye representing the strengths of Indigenous knowledge and the other eye representing the strengths of Western knowledge to form a better range of sight or a bigger picture. And then last but not least, avoid making assumptions. So on Turtle Island, also known as North America, there are distinct Indigenous groups that have different customs and practices. So when we're working with Indigenous communities and implementing initiatives, we want to avoid using the pan-Indigenous approach, which groups all Indigenous people together despite the very different cultural practices. But that being said, Indigenous people share the universal view that, or the universal connection to land. But overall, it's just better to ask than assume that maybe the customs that one nation is following is the same as the customs another nation is following. So there just might be different protocols. So that's definitely important to keep in mind. So I'll pass it off back to Chantal.
Great. So I'm going to share a quick video with you all. So Stain Atat is an Indigenous cultural educator from the Kawatsan Nation with a message about slowing down.
I want to talk about how we speak. When we speak English, we try to speak as many words as fast as we can because we respect the audience's time, and we want to ensure we get as much information across as quickly as we can because the individual that has to listen to us has other things to do. In Hulkameetnam, it's the opposite. We show respect to our listeners by slowing our words down to ensure that they can hear every sound we make. Every, all there, smooth and slow. And sometimes it gets misconstrued because in English we talk so fast that we often think those who speak slowly are slow. But in Hulkameetnam, it's also the opposite. When you speak too fast, you are in a rush, and there's nothing worse in our way than rushing the interaction you're having with whoever you're having it with. So when you're working with, the elders, slow down. Your words, your mind, your questions, and your actions. Slow down. I think we could all do really well if we just slowed down. I want to talk about.
All right, and over to Naomi.
Yeah, so a couple of the actions we can follow and implement is truth. So learn the true Indigenous history in your local area. Learn, present, and ongoing oppression. You can take courses in professional development for staff and also use the APGA IDEA resources. Basics during onboarding for staff and volunteers. You can also implement Indigenous ways of knowing in that way. And then next we have to acknowledge, and that is to learn about the land you live on and its importance to local Indigenous communities, both historically and today. So doing land acknowledgements in meaningful ways. We can also practice, so deliver personal and meaningful land acknowledgements, like I said, orally before programs, meetings, and events. Additionally, we can celebrate, so learn and celebrate Indigenous people's histories, cultures, pride, achievements, and diversities. You can attend powwows and other cultural activities. I think previously, there's been the notion that those events are closed off to anybody who's not Indigenous, but it's certainly not the case. There are definitely events that everyone can attend. That's one way. And then we have build relationships. So the family days, getting those community builds, university programs, attending Indigenous-led courses and events, and not stakeholders, not with them as stakeholders, but viewing them as partners as well. We can amplify, so use our provide a platform from Indigenous voices and hire educators for courses, or also hiring Indigenous staff, students, and selling Indigenous-made products in gift stores, or you can use Indigenous naming on plant labels. Then we have reciprocate, so it starts with gratitude, and we ought to be in gratitude when Indigenous folks are willing to share cultural knowledge with us, despite having been demeaned for their worldviews previously. And so we're very grateful to have them share their gifts with us. And then lastly, but not least, we have the land back. So that is, how can we provide a space where Indigenous peoples can practice ceremony, their sacred fire? How can we better support self-determination in providing a space for our Indigenous peoples?
And that's our presentation. I do have a set of resources here, but we'll post them in the chat after the session.
Thank you so much, Chantal and Naomi. And up next, we have Wendy DePaolis. If you could stop sharing your screen, and we'll let Wendy load her slides. And Wendy, you're all set to go.
As long as I unmute. Thank you so much. I've just been sitting here inspired by all of you. And thank you to the 200 to 300 people that are with us today and interested in this topic. My name's Wendy DePaolis. I'm the Curator of Art and Sculpture here at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. I was invited here today to specifically talk about art and the art partnerships that we've developed here at the Arboretum. While there have been other partnerships developed with Indigenous people, I'm going to focus on the art alone. And I'm just so excited. And I will begin with 3 examples. If I can get my screen going. There we go. Whoops, I'm sorry. A bit of a delay. I guess I'm going to start with the mission of the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, which was the mission when I joined in 2015. And you can see at that point, it's to welcome, inform, and inspire all through outstanding displays, protected natural areas, horticultural research, and education. Prior to my coming on board, we did not have an art mission, but I took this mission and extended it to, again, built on the welcome and informing, so the educational part, but also I wanted to make sure that we're connecting people to the land through art and to people to art through the land. In order to do that in a really profound way, I have met 3 significant Indigenous partners over the years here at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, and I'll be talking about the installations that these 3 folks have done. Marlena Miles on your left, Spirit Lake, Dakota, has installed an augmented reality art installation here that is still up and running, and I'll be spending most of my time on that installation. The center person you see there is Gordon Coons, who's an enrolled member of La Coudere Band of the Chippewa, And Gordon has done we installed an interior exhibition of his. And finally, John Sterner on the right is a member of the Lakota tribe from South Dakota, and he has a permanent sculpture installed here at the Arboretum. So for the first installation that we're going to talk about and that I mentioned, I'd like to introduce you to Wope. Wope is the Dakota spirit of compassion, harmony, and peace. And she teaches us through this augmented reality installation about the Dakota connections to the world around us. And here we are up at the top of a place we call High Point here at the Arboretum. And in the beginning, we meet the four winds that Wope introduces us to. This is an example, or this is the walking map on the right. So you can see we have 5 stops in this. We start there at High Point and go stop number 2 over with a maple and red cedar. 3 is an oak tree, 4 is a pine grove, 5 is the final sculpture. Marlena Miles chose all of these spots for this installation. She was out in a golf cart with us one day, and honestly, the spots came to her immediately as she was riding around, and she knew exactly. She had the whole vision laid out as we were riding in this golf cart. The image you see on the left are visitors actually using the application that I'll talk more about. So this is the application as it shows up on your phone. It's by an app called Revelo that you download for free on your phone. Miles' stunning artwork there that you see, the digital artwork, is overlaid on the Arboretum landscape via a telephone camera. And note the bottom left where it says map, that takes you back to the walking map that I just showed you. And the bottom right icons give you more information, as well as an in-app camera, which I can give you a better idea of in a moment. But first, let's go to the stop of what Marlena Miles via Wope wants to communicate. So this stop is in front of a beautiful oak tree in an area called the Shrub Rose Garden. The oak tree, and the reason Marlena chose it was that it's protected by a lot of plantings around it. You can't get close to the oak tree. And she really wanted people to understand that you need to respect boundaries in nature, just as we need to respect people's boundaries. And by creating and having all this greenery and plants around there, we're giving this beautiful oak tree its space. The roots aren't being compressed by people stomping all over it. There's plenty of pollinators enjoying this space. She talks about the acorns and the number of acorns that are dropped from this tree and sustain life, and how many animals enjoy those, as well as how many trees potentially could come from this one tree. And those hands that you see there are Marlena's way of asking us to place a virtual hand up towards the tree, not getting close to it, not necessarily putting your hands all over it, but promising to love and respect and cherish and honor what Mother Nature has provided for us. This is the in-app camera feature that I was talking about. So you can see the figures at the bottom right, 2 viewers that were experiencing Marlena's application, and it's been a really fun way to share her work, and we've had some great visitor responses to that. In addition to these lovely 5 stops that Marlena launched with us, she was gracious enough to do many other wonderful learning opportunities, such as this panel discussion that you see here. And we have Jeff Stevens on the far left from Pixel Farm, who has been our tech support and continues to be our outside tech support for this application. Marlena in the center and myself on the right. Marlena has given a lot of advice through this too, which is just really generous of her as we go through this process. And it's similar to a lot of things that Naomi has said and that the other panelists have discussed, but we really need to make sure that the Native artists tell their own stories and tell it in a way that they want to tell it and that their messaging comes through. You can't have preconceived notions about what that story should be. Making the land accessible to the Native community, and we'll talk more about that. It was a must-have for Marlena that if she was going to participate with us, that this land, this Dakota land, be made accessible to not just the Dakota people, but all Indigenous people on Turtle Island. She wants to make sure that these relationships are ongoing, which has really been lovely. We've been working on her projects for over 2.5 years, and we've still got something else to install. And I love that she always gives us plant analogies. In this case, don't plant seeds and neglect what can come of them in the future. Be patient. Secure funding, can always use more funding, and there's ways to get that either upfront, we've through grants or private donors. Seemingly in our situation, the more people that have learned about this, the more people are coming forward and wanting to fund it. So it's been really lovely. And then hosting celebrations to recognize the hard work and making sure, it was really important to her that the event be Native led. It's that she should guide the guests who should be invited. And we had, including music, dance, food, crafts, and vendors. And this is an example of the Sampson brothers and their hoop dancing, which was phenomenal and something that everyone you can see enjoyed. So some significant outcomes from this partnership, and I want to make sure I'm leaving enough time for questions. All Indigenous people now have free access to the Arboretum. There's no need to prove you're a tribal member of anything. You just simply state that you are Indigenous and we welcome you in. And that's just a really, it shows support. And we've seen that support from leadership since the very beginning. Donors are aligned and supportive of all new programming that comes up, whether it seemingly is with art or plants. So I really feel like tentacles are spreading within the Arboretum, and art is such a visible means to as we develop these relationships, that it's been really exciting and beautiful. The trustees have been very thoughtful. They come forward with ideas regarding Indigenous initiatives, which was not happening a few years ago, and very grateful and thankful for that. Staff and volunteers are excited and are just clamoring for more opportunities. Lots of great feedback from visitors and community partners. And I'm really looking forward to more opportunities, and I'm working on things right now for a continuing sustainable program for Indigenous artists in the future here. This is something we're going to install in the spring. This is the Minnesota River Valley land map that Marlena designed. You can see that's the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum on the map. This is an outdoor map that will be, it's about 6 people will encounter it as they're snowshoeing or walking around, and just such a great visual reminder of the land that they are currently on. This is the second piece that I'm going to talk about, John Sterner's permanent sculpture called Kichi-Yuzapi. Kichi-Yuzapi means in Lakota, loosely means holding each other sacredly. And when he first commissioned, this piece was first commissioned, it was done for a couple that he felt their relationship was so tight and so sweet that he named it that. When he rededicated it here at the Arboretum, and that's where it's planted now, he rededicated it to mean we're holding the land sacred and it holds us sacred. The plantings you see on the right were chosen in concert with horticulturalist Audrey Bush, Dr. Mary Meyer, our grasses collection, and most importantly, John Sterner himself and his family. And here we have a picture of Community Planting Day from John and family, along with staff and volunteers here at the Arboretum. And when this is the last stop also, this is Kichi-Yuzapi. When Marlena saw this sculpture and heard that it was named Kichi-Yuzapi, she immediately made it her last stop, and she saw this idea of the sacred hoop, which is the name of the walk, ending at this spot where everything is held together, where the land, the plants, the animals, the insects, the pollinators is all brought together and respected. And I think when John Sterner saw this, he was brought to tears. He had never met Marlena, and this idea of her being so moved by his sculpture to create this final piece was really, really wonderful. So we've just had a lot of really poignant moments like that throughout these relationships. The last installation that I'd like to talk about is Gordon Coons and his friends here in Visions from the Land. This was an Anishinaabe Ojibwe exhibition that was installed last winter, spring. Gordon Coons, as you saw in the center, is a very renowned Ojibwe artist. He is in permanent collections at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Minnesota History Center, all over the country. And his primary objective in doing the show here was to uplift other artists from the community. And he did this by inviting 3 other artists from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and North Dakota to join him. And this is James Autio, you see on the far left. The 3 other artists that joined him had never exhibited in any sort of formal gallery format. So he was not only giving them exposure, so to speak, but he was teaching them how you set up, how you work in a gallery and with a gallerist and curator, and he, being the partner and the liaison, made everything run so beautifully and smoothly. It was really important to him that other artists, authors, etc., come into the gallery space as well. So this is an example of Ramona Morrow, who is she is also from the Curator band of the Lake Superior Chippewa. And here you can see her stunning beadwork. She's got cattail dolls, regalia. She had pipes and art and baskets and cradle boards. And she's been featured nationwide in many publications and was also in an exhibition at the Smithsonian. He also invited Hope Flanagan as an elder and a storyteller to be on site and just add that element of whimsical fun to the whole day, along with, of course, we had Indigenous caterers and music as well. Again, all Native led. When you ask people, as we've done, give us one word as a reaction to one of these art installations that they've encountered, here's what you see. There is really, as I said at the beginning, clamoring for more. And in order to do that, these cannot be one-off experiences. The relationships have continued and will continue. And I'd like to end with Marlena's quote here that she wrote about a month ago to me and wanted me to share this. It will be a part of a documentary that she is producing. And you can, I'll just read it. It's Wope, again, the Dakota spirit of peace and harmony leads visitors in this augmented reality installation, drawing on the wisdom from the plant nation, the natural world. So that's what we talked about. That's what I saw. That's what I showed you. As a pivotal step in this journey, the Arboretum embraced transformative change by granting free admission to Indigenous peoples, dismantling a barrier that had long obstructed our connection to this space. This gesture signifies more than a mere physical return for Native peoples. It symbolizes a profound acknowledgement of reclaiming the land as relative. I'm sincerely grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this significant connection by channeling Wope's teachings. So it's that reciprocity that Naomi was talking about, right? It's what do we have to offer that is of value to these partners? And with the APGA, we're in this unique position. What we have is land. And I'm really just honored and excited to be here and working for a member of APGA at this point in time when this important work is taking place for all of us. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you to all the presenters. How phenomenal. And something that I'm really taking away from this is, I think that this is a real opportunity, right? Where public gardens are becoming a bridge and a space for healing in different ways for different people. But when we talk about Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, like we really have that opportunity to really bridge some of those gaps, right? And so I think that this has just been really extraordinary, all of your presentations and showing the different ways that you're doing this. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all the questions. We've got about 8 minutes, but I think I want to pull just a couple of things. Well, first of all, if you all as panelists or presenters are okay with people reaching out to you, emailing you with a question, please provide that in the chat. I think that way that, if folks really do want to follow up on a question they have, they can reach out to you for that. So just thinking, if I'm going to maybe combine a couple of the questions, I know, and I hear this often as well, which is, where do you gain a start? Are there specific kind of initial steps that you can take, things that you can do? Building, how do what are some first things that you can do to build relationships? And I saw that question directed towards students of tribes in a university setting, perhaps, but I think that it can even extend beyond that. Does anybody care to comment about that?
I think I put this in the answer, in the question and answers, but I think it's important, and Naomi mentioned this as well, when we're entering into new relationships, to throw away what you're hoping for the outcome to be and to just go into it with, an open heart, and always to reflect back. This is really important. Always reflecting back to see, am I coming at this in a good way? And so in a good way, if you have open heart, open mind, and looking back at the pieces that Naomi mentioned around, who is this benefiting? And so I think that's really important. Yeah, throw away what you're hoping to come out of it and enter it in a new, fresh way to see what can possibly flourish out of it, and beautiful things can happen.
That's right. It's really, truly a process, and it does need to be cultivated and taken time. But I've also heard things about really doing your research and educating yourself about treatises. Did I say that? I don't know the plural of treaties, but also kind of understanding local, if you can, doing some research or connecting with others to learn about local politics within them, because you also don't want to find yourself in the middle of it. So it is important to do some research and some educating of yourselves, but also then as you're connecting and building those relationships, it does take time, but you also want to learn, right? Be in a space of curiosity and openness. And then I always hear this winner, food. It's really important culturally, understanding certain cultures and the significance around food. So, don't hand out, cold coffee and stale donuts. We can do better than that. Sometimes it just starts with a small meal. The other question I want to kind of get to is around tribal politics. So if any of you can speak to, how have you navigated or learned about tribal politics? And is there any advice that you can give?
I can talk about our approach. Really, the design team and Dave, this man named Dave Thomas, was the lead. He was the conduit, so he was the one speaking to different people, and yeah, everyone has different opinions. Everyone has different approaches and thoughts, and that's going to happen. It's going to be there. It exists with our project, but his goal was really to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with many different people, so that as many people as possible understood what he was doing and what his role was and what he was trying to achieve. And that's our starting point. And again, I think Naomi spoke to it too, was, different communities, different nations have different stories. And so you can't be everything to everyone in one story. And so it's a balancing in that sense that Dave, his approach was, and trying to focus on the connection to land was really the key thing that you would experience as you went through the gardens here. Our other aspect of that is our Indigenous Programming Advisory Circle. That's really another way to get as many sounding boards and advice and just sort of your starting point. So that's really our approach on our end. And every day is a learning day. Everything's a learning process. And like Chantal and Naomi said, you learn from your mistakes. We've made some, and we probably will make some more. But again, we want to learn from that, admit that, and learn from that.
Thank you so much. Very well spoken. And also thank you for sharing your contact information in the chat. I've also shared a few different resources. A lot of folks are always interested in training, and I think that's a really great point. So there are some really great resources out there. I've put some links to them, but I'm also going to shamelessly plug the Idea Center for Public Gardens and our annual cohort program. We have 2 sessions dedicated to Indigenous engagement and inclusion from First Nations and or tribal citizens. And so it's really extraordinary. A lot of awareness building, but we also do it across a lot of other topics. So this conversation will be continued next month, where we will be inviting those First Nations and Indigenous peoples to the table. So it's a continuation. I think it's important when we have this topic or any topic relating to IDEA that we invite those that we're talking about. We have to hear from them. They're at the center of this, so we can recenter that attention. So we'll be putting registration out for that soon. Stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, presenters and panelists. You all are extraordinary and doing really wonderful things. And I think that there could not have been a better way to start 2024. My heart's about to explode. There's so many good things that y'all are doing, continuing on the great work to everyone. Thank you so much and be well. We'll see you soon.